Episode 286, The Once and Future World. This is the Change Underground. I'm your host, John Moore. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. As this pod enters its 7th year, I can see some patterns from the last 6. The big one is the continued decline in honeybee populations and mass deaths following spraying events. I've added a photo to the show notes on the website, worldorganicnews.com/episode 286, showing which foods would drop from the supply chain, as we say these days, if our pollinators went missing. If we killed them off through our own inability to respond to reality. And the bee question is, of course, a microcosm for the whole planet. Over the past 6 years, I've reported on the last 60 harvests, the 10 years to fix the CO2 issue, and a growing number of responses to these and other matters. Plastics continue to accumulate and bioaccumulate in the environment, leaking estrogen-mimicking compounds into every niche on the planet except perhaps the ones around undersea volcanic vents, where the extremophiles live. They're really hard species, and that's where they find their life cycles. A couple of Bill Mollison quotes have surfaced repeatedly. In the plastic pollution case, it's this one: waste is just a resource in the wrong place. We could use this approach with tailing dams at mine sites, manure lagoons at CAFOs, confined animal feeding operations, better described as prison factory farms. With most manufactured foods, or as Michael Pollan better describes these things, food-like substances. Our bodies are not the places for these wastes. In the last 6 years, shale oil has boomed and busted and boomed again. Wildfires have ripped through Canada, Siberia, the US, South Africa, and here in Australia. A massive fire in the southwest of Western Australia is currently being brought under control, only with the help of a cold change and maybe some rain too. Now, I thought things were crook in 2016 when I started this pod. I'm convinced that they are much worse now, and in that, surprisingly, comes hope. The other Bill Mollison quote that appeared with regularity is roughly that only 10% of us need to move from consumption to production, and there will be enough food for all. Now, of course, Bill was talking about food production, but it's a good starting point for energy too. Here in Australia, we blew past 10% of homes having solar panels almost before I started the pod, and we're now at 30+% and continue to grow. This is happening across the globe. Even in so-called wet and rainy Dublin, solar panel usage is growing. Despite the depressing outcomes of the COP26 in Glasgow, people are voting with their dollars. Even if China, India and our one-seat majority Conservative government and their will do anything for the coal miners votes attitude, things are changing. In Australia, the federated state system has given us a back door, so to speak, way of getting things done. At the state level, real targets are in place, plans to achieve them and results and data coming in to support their plans. Back in 2017, the mercurial Elon Musk added a battery to the South Australian grid in less than 100 days from handshake to functioning, and that has stabilised the grid and shown how renewables and storage are a cost-effective alternative to coal or even gas-fired electricity generation. All this before we hit the big change that started 30 to 50 years ago and is now the overnight success du jour. I'm talking about regenerative agriculture. No-till, cover crop-driven arable farming has been through most of its birthing pains over the last 70 years. It is an established, effective way to grow soil for the planet and food for us. The missing bit 6 years ago was animal agriculture. CAFOs, as you must be sick of hearing me say, are an abomination. Cruel to the confined animals and destructive to the humans who have to work in these places. Regenerative grazing, biomimicry at its best, combined with no-till row crop production, will feed the world chemically free. The other elephant in the room, of course, is the pandemic. This is still showing us the cracks within the world economy, all the way from the extreme macro perspective to the household level. We have, despite the deaths, the illness and suffering, been relatively lucky. And I don't mean to take away from anyone suffering with this, I'm just looking at it from a numbers point of view. SARS-CoV-2 doesn't have the mortality rate of bubonic plague or smallpox, nor even Ebola. We have, in fact, with this pandemic, been given a warning shot across our bows. The next pandemic, and there will be one as surely as there will be another drought, may be an existential threat to our way of living if it has a high enough death rate. But we have been given time to fix the less resilient parts of our lives. The first lesson, the obvious first lesson to me anyway, is to shorten supply lines. Now, whether this means growing your food at home, or as part of a community garden, or on an allotment, or any other way you can think of, and I firmly believe now is the time to no dig. Even if it seems unlikely, it is another 100 years until the next pandemic, you'll be eating so much better, reducing fuel usage, and be learning a little bit more about your part of the world. In my part of the world, getting ready for next spring-summer's blue corn crop has begun. We are in this late summer here in 2022 in the Southern Hemisphere. And the best laid plans of mice and men do sometimes come good, despite Robert Burns. And the tear gassing event I went through last week, where I'd mixed cayenne pepper with buckwheat seeds in an attempt to keep it safe from birds. I had spotted large numbers of birds apparently consuming said buckwheat. So yesterday, as I walked the area I'd broadcast, I discovered seedlings growing away very nicely and was very surprised and pleased to see them, all at the two-leaf stage and looking healthy. There is a pessimism permeating food production that seems to grow with the area under cultivation. A 10,000-year history of things going wrong occasionally, despite the fact that most attempts actually resulted in food, may be to blame. I suspect the consequences of crop failure were so dire these events tended to stick in the mind. I may have to toss out some more seed to fill in any sort of areas that are a bit sparse, but I was probably going to have to do that anyway. So the buckwheat is underway. I've even managed to source within Tasmania a mix of white clovers. Importing some types of seed into Tassie can be tricky with our biosecurity, and really I'm happy to have tight biosecurity arrangements, but they do make for longer planting periods. The clovers will grow under and then replace the buckwheat as we head into autumn and winter. Come corn planting time, I'll make a 20 centimetre cut into the clover on 100 metre centres, and as the corn grows it shades out the clover, which releases nitrogen as it dies off. Once the corn is harvested, the clover bounces back until next year, and the cycle continues. A short sequence rotation is to add more buckwheat between the corn harvest and the clover bounce back. The buckwheat seems to make phosphorus bioavailable to plants, and it seems from the reading I've done, clovers benefit from this element during the establishment and growback periods. Now, white clover in this case, is a perennial legume. It is therefore sequestering nitrogen from the atmosphere whilst ever it is growing, and then releasing the said nitrogen into the soil whenever it dies back. And maybe the need to rotate crops can be alleviated with this system. Constantly covered soil doesn't leak CO2 either in large amounts, so hopefully I'm doing my bit where I can with what I have. I'm looking forward to at least the next 6 years with you all. If you know anyone who would benefit from hearing the show, please let them know. I really appreciate the word being spread. Also have a buy me a coffee link in the show notes and at the website if you'd like to support the show. And of course there's the free ebook over there at the website as well, and the No Dig Gardening course. So remember to decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Thank you all for listening, and I'll be back next week.